Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today I would like to show you a TARKIN vehicle. This is going to be our first in-depth deck tech video about a deck with Shadow of the Galaxy. And this is, if you would have told me a couple of months back that I would have made my first deck tech for Shadow of the Galaxy would be a Tarkin deck, I would have called you crazy. Obviously, I was not expecting Tarkin to get any better with the new set because he's obviously interacting with Imperial units, and we were not going to see a lot of Imperial units out of the new set because it was mostly an underworld-focused deck. And for all those reasons, I was kind of thinking, well, Gram of Tarkin is a thing of the past. But then one of my friends, called as Voltor, also known as Beton, who has actually his own YouTube channel, and the reason why I've delayed this video is because I wanted him to show his first, to make his own video about it before I put mine, came up with this deck. And when I saw it, I was like, what is this giant pile of crap? Because this was just a giant pile of crap in my eyes. And then I started playing against it, and I recognized the power of the card. This is where I say that it's always very important to remain open-minded whenever you are playing the game. Obviously, the list has evolved a lot since then and has become a lot more consistent, making it very obvious that this deck is going to be a pretty powerful deck in my opinion, and a deck that, especially early on in a meta, is going to be very powerful because it's a very strong proactive strategy that basically take the game from a different angle. And those kind of proactive strategies are usually very powerful early on in a meta. And I'll explain why a bit more in details. But first of all, I just want to give the shout out, of course, to Beton, who gave me the authorization to give me the green light to show this deck on my channel. And I also, of course, put his video about the deck in the description, even though his video is probably going to be a lot shorter than mine because I like to go very in-depth with things. So, basically, the idea of this deck, so this is a Tarkin vehicle deck, so the idea is to be aggressive, using vehicle and abusing Gram of Tarkin's ability to put experience on things. So, let's take a look. So the reason why I think this kind of deck is going to be very powerful early on in the meta because it takes the game from a different angles and really requires very specific answers in order to be dealt with. And I don't think people are going to be accounting for that type of decks early on in the meta. So you can really take an opponent by surprise by playing a deck like this. So let's first talk about the leaders. Gram of Tarkin, you probably already know what he does as a Spark of Rebellion leader. And it can pay 1 resources and exhaust in order to give experience to an Imperial unit. Generally very powerful ability, and this is the reason we play the leader. Why would we play this leader over a Boba Green deck? Because we could literally play the same deck but with a Boba Green instead of Tarkin. The answer to that question is because Tarkin is Tarkin's leader's ability is incredibly impactful in his deck, and I'll explain it, of course, throughout the video. As a leader deploy is not as impressive, but honestly, it doesn't matter. Just the leader ability itself is what we're looking for in this leader. So, the game plan of the deck is very much puts units. Most of our decks is space focused, but basically puts space units, boost them using Gram of Tarkin, and create those very difficult to deal with threats that are going to put a ton of pressure on the opponent. It's also a very synergy based deck, meaning that cards taken individually are not so powerful, but combined together becomes a lot more powerful. And of course, as we move forward, as we get more sets, you're going to see a lot more synergy based deck over what I call good stuff deck, meaning just deck that are simply made out of very good cards. So a lot of cards in this deck don't seem to be really good in a vacuum, but become very powerful when combined with the other elements of the deck. So it's a very, very powerful deck for that reason. So the game plan, as I said, is try to play a early game unit, usually a 1-drop in which we're going to be boosting with the Imperial, giving some very good stats. And then on turn 2, we're going to put a space unit. You're often going to be a 7-speed defender or a Lurking TIE Phantom. And then on turn 4, we're going to be resolving a triple Dark Raid, a TIE Advance, put a ton of experience tokens on one of those 2 cards, which is difficult to deal with, and then put a ton of pressure on the opponent. That's kind of like the crux of what we're doing. So let's deep dive into the 3 core cards of the deck, which are 7th Fleet Defender, Lurking TIE Phantoms, and Triple Dark Raid. So 7th Fleet Defender is even better in this deck as it is in other decks. I mean, everybody knows it's kind of the best 3-drop in space. But in this deck it is better simply because it is Imperial and we can boost him. And boosting units that have shield on them, that are by nature difficult to deal with, is very, very powerful, because obviously space units by nature are more difficult to interact with than ground units. They're far more removal events, far more ambush units on the ground, far more likely to have units on the other side. Therefore, by nature, space units are more difficult to interact with. And when you add on top of this the shield, it makes the 7th Fleet Defender is likely to stay on the battlefield. And one of the answers to 7th Fleet Defender, such as make an opening and stuff, don't even become valid once we manage to put at least one experience token on the 7th Fleet Defender, which is very easy to do. And once, so 7th Fleet Defender is just a very hard to interact with 2-drop. Lurking TIE Phantoms fulfill the very similar role as TIE Defender. It just is, in my opinion, an even better version of TIE Defender in this specific deck. And the reason being is that TIE Phantom is kind of stronger against removal, generally speaking, but it is weaker against enemy space units. But this problem does not really become a problem anymore once we've grown the Lurking TIE Phantom to a certain size. Once the Lurking TIE Phantom starts to have 1, 2, 3 experience token on it, it becomes impossible to deal with for a lot of decks. Unless you're playing against a Cunning deck that might have a Waylay or a Frozen and Carbonite, then other than that, Lurking TIE Phantom is going to be incredibly difficult to deal with. Obviously, if you're playing against decks that have specific answer to TIE Phantom, you're going to play around and you're going to take this into account. And maybe not put all of your eggs in the same basket. But in almost any other matchup, you can kind of like do that. Basically put all of your eggs on the Lurking TIE Phantom and swing massive swings, and your opponent really cannot do anything about it, which is incredible. Not only that, Lurking TIE Phantoms are great counters to the control decks to play Power of the Dark Side, Avenger, because every time there's a card that forces you to defeat a unit, you can simply just choose Lurking TIE Phantom, say, okay, well, I'll defeat Lurking TIE Phantom, and because Lurking TIE Phantom cannot be defeated through card's abilities, nothing happens. And the same can happen to Cat Bane as well. Opponent has a Cat Bane, every time it triggers Cat Bane ability, you choose Lurking TIE Phantom, you take no damage. So those are very, very powerful counters that really makes Lurking TIE Phantoms one of the best cards in the deck. Moving on with Triple Dark Raid. So Triple Dark Raid is kind of a sneak attack, but like much, much better in a vehicle deck for multiple reasons. First of all, you don't need to have the card plus the card you want to put in play. You can simply just play Triple Dark Raid by itself, and then look at the top 7 card of your deck, find a vehicle, and play it with a discount of 2 resources, because the card costs 3, allows you to play a card that costs 5. Obviously, it can put cards that are bigger than this, but then you have to pay the difference. Meaning, if you are playing this card for 4, you can pay a vehicle that costs 6. If you pay this card for 6, then you can put a card that costs 8, and so on. And what happens is like the card comes to play ready, and then at the end, instead of being defeated, returns back into your hand, meaning you're not doing any card disadvantage, you're actually getting a card back. And once again, it digs 7 deep, meaning that you get a selection of different vehicles you can take, which is very valuable. So how do you usually use Triple Dark Raid? So Triple Dark Raid weakness is sort of like there's just not that many vehicles that are really good to cheat in play. But one of the things that my friend Voltor discovers is that Triple Dark Raid is not only good to cheat a big space units into play, big vehicles into play. It's also very good with vehicles that are very powerful entering battlefield effect. And one of those is TIE Advance. So this will, of course, multiplies the amount of different interesting options you can have for this card. So there's basically 3 ways to use Triple Dark Raid. You can basically play Triple Dark Raid on curve, so meaning for 3 resources, to play a TIE Advance. And what happens is that you're going to put 2 experience unit on another Imperial unit, and then you're going to get a 3/2 that comes into play ready that you can attack with right away. So you get a ready TIE Advance, 2 experience tokens on your unit, and then you get your TIE Advance back into your hand that you can replay later on to give more experience token, and all of this for only 3 resources, which is pretty amazing. Most of the time, I do not like to play Triple Dark Raid at 3, because most likely you're going to be able to put experience token only on a small unit like a TIE fighter on an ISB agent, and those units are not as resilient as the 7th Fleet Defender or Lurking TIE Phantom. So I usually prefer to play it on turn 3, so for 4 resources, and then I can put the experience tokens on the 7th Fleet Defender or Lurking TIE Phantoms, and then I have 1 resource to spare to use Gram of Tarkin's ability. And also this means that if I do not find a TIE advance, I can always look for an ATST or a Pirate Battle Tank instead, which is a very strong cards you can get that gives you a 6/7 overwhelm that comes into play ready and comes back into your hand. If you need some sort of protection on the ground, we get the Sentinel. So Triple Dark Raid, usually you want to play it on turn 3 for 4 resources. Whenever you have 4 resources available, that gives you much more options. Another card you can grab as well for cheap is the Outlaw TIE Vanguard. Not as sexy as TIE Advance, because it only gives you 1 experience token and gives you a 2/1, but it's an okay thing to pick up. It's okay. Another way to use Triple Dark Raid is to wait a little bit more and wait until you have 6 resources, and at that stage you can actually bring out Reinforcement Walker or an Architan Assault Cruiser. And those are pretty amazing cards to get from Triple Dark Raid. Reinforcement Walkers comes into play, you get to draw a card or you heal 3, and because it comes to play ready, you get to attack with Reinforcement Walker, and then get the trigger again. So you get a double trigger Reinforcement Walker as well as swinging for 6, which is absolutely backbreaking. Architans will give you this kind of giant a unit that will deal with anything in space. Can be very good if there's a big space unit that kind of blocks you. It's a card that we want to have in sort of the Triple Dark Raid toolbox, if I may say. So Triple Dark Raid is absolutely incredible in the deck. It is the most powerful card in the deck. Obviously, it can just give you like additional copies of Lurking TIE Phantom, 7th Fleet Defender, you get to attack right away. That's not the main way we're going to be using that, but that can happen sometimes. But yeah, the primary target are going to be TIE Advance, ATST, if we need a Sentinel, Pirated Battle Tank, Reinforcement Walker. So the best target would be, I would say, TIE Advance, ATST, Reinforcement Walker in that sense. So moving on now, we're going to go through the cards from the cheapest to the most expensive to the most expensive in each category. First, we got ISB Agent. So ISB Agent is pretty solid in this deck because it allows us to knock out shield. There's a lot of shielded units in the meta. It gives you the extra damage you need to kill something, so it's very flexible. And the 1/3 body, obviously, if you play this on turn 1, it becomes a 2/4. So this card is often going to be just a 2/4 for 2 Imperial, which is actually that deals damage when it comes to play, and all that is actually very good for just a one for a card that costs 1. So it's just a pretty solid card in this deck that gives us more 1-drop. So this deck is mostly focused on space because it plays vehicles, but in space, unfortunately, there's just not that many good vehicles to play on turn 1. So we need to play a few more ground units in the ground at the beginning of the game in order to make our curve a little bit more consistent. Moving on, we got Admiral Piet. So Admiral Piet is very good in this deck because, first of all, the 1/4 stat line can very easily become 2/5. So low attack, high health is just good combination with Tarkin, generally speaking. And the ability is incredibly powerful in this deck because we play a lot of units that cost 6 or more. And not only that, we have ways to share Triple Dark Raid into our hand. So we play Triple Dark Raid. We actually play Triple Dark Raid. So Triple Dark Raid does not combine with ATST in the sense that if you play Piet and you play Triple Dark Raid, you won't be able to ambush and then ready the unit as you can do with whenever you use ECL on a Fire Spray. However, it's still very strong to just get the unit untap, attack, then the unit comes back into your hand, and then you have a Piet in play. Now you can just play the 6-drop in your hand, and those 3 drops are going to have ambush. Obviously, Piet, Reinforcement Walker is still an incredibly powerful combination, so it is just a very good card in the later stage of the game. Obviously, you do not necessarily want to play this early on, even sometimes you don't really have a choice. It's a card that you really want to capitalize on in the later stage of the game to get those massive swings late game and do some crazy stuff with that. Next we got Incinerator Troopers. So it's funny because this deck was implemented very late after the deck kind of got built because Beton was looking for more ways to have a solid turn 1 play, and it turns out that the deck already had every single card that combines very well with Incinerator Trooper. So Incinerator Trooper on itself, not a great card. Yes, it kills stuff before it gets to damage back, but it has very weak stats. But once you're able to boost his attack, it becomes insanely powerful. And there's obviously a lot of ways to do this in this deck. We play 3 copies of Snowtrooper Lieutenant, 3 copies of Surprise Strike, and also Gram of Talking ability to boost that unit. It is an Imperial, so you get boosted by Outland TIE Vanguard, get boosted by TIE Advance. And once the Incinerator becomes really big, it becomes a huge menace on the ground and manages to keep the game under control and puts a lot of pressure on the opponent. So yeah, pretty solid card in this specific deck. We just have so many interactions that works very well with it. Moving on, we got Snowtrooper Lieutenant. We are playing an aggressive deck, so having a unit that can come into play and boost our unit is very effective. It has strong combos with Incinerator Trooper. It is an Imperial. It gives us at the same time, it at the same time boost our unit to put more pressure on the opponent. It also gives us a body that we can boost with Gram of Tarkin. Whenever we play Tarkin, the more Tarkin we have, the more Imperial units we have, the better. As long as we have an Imperial unit in play, we feel good because we can put ton of experience and turn this small card into a big one. And it's actually funny because Fleet Lieutenant is considered one of the best aggressive card in Spark of Rebellion, and Snowtrooper Lieutenant is not as highly regarded for multiple reasons. First of all, because 3-3 for 3 is just so much better than 2-2 for 2. But also because aggressive Imperial decks were not as popular, to say the least. But in this case, the fact that we can boost the Snowtrooper Lieutenant for 1 resources means that it is basically just as good as a Fleet Lieutenant in most cases. Moving on, we got the ATST, not a super amazing card on its own, but combines very well with ATST and obviously great with Triple Dark Raid, that's why it's in the deck. And the fact that Overwhelm fits very well with the aggressive plan of just killing something and just dealing a bunch of damage behind. Priority Battle Tank is more of like a toolbox card that we're going to need whenever we want to stabilize and slow down. This is a lot of time where it's a deck that wants to race. It's a deck that wants to race the opponent as much as possible. And what better ways to race but to put a very large sentinels to block the enemy. The fact that it smuggles is very relevant. And the fact that it can be grabbed from Triple Dark Raid is also very, very good, and it combines with Piet as well. Not an Imperial, but I think for this unit it's okay because it already has very impressive stats. Reinforcement Walker, we already talked about it. Not the kind of deck that normally would want to play a Walker, but there's just so many sweet synergies with that card in this deck between Piet and Triple Dark Raid that makes this card an absolute powerhouse that can just draw you a million cards and set you off for the late game. On top of swinging a massive amount of damage to the base whenever it's played with Triple Dark Raid. TIE Fighter is going to be our space turn 1 play because it is basically a 3-2 for 2 in this deck as you play on turn 1 and then you can boost it with Tarkin. A card that is widely regarded as not so strong by itself becomes incredible in the context of the Tarkin deck, and it can of course grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger if it's left alive. So it's just a very solid turn 1 play. It is our best turn 1 play we could possibly have most of the time. Outland TIE Fighters is not like the most amazing card ever, but it does work as a mini TIE Advance in this deck, and it does work pretty well. Most of our units cost 3 or less, so we can easily boost almost anything, put another Imperial unit on the board as well as boosting an existing unit. It just does exactly what the deck wants to do. And I was not expecting this card to see a lot of constructed play, but it turns out that we found a perfect deck for it, and that's why we're playing it. Next, of course, our TIE Advance. So TIE Advance is basically Outland TIE Fighters, but much better in this specific deck, as it obviously can be played with. It's a great card to pull out of Triple Dark Raid, or even just a card to play normally is going to be very solid. It does everything we want. It has initial threat on the board, and boost our existing units. The Arcadian Assault Cruiser is very much just a toolbox card from the Triple Dark Raid. As we play Triple Dark Raid, it gives us an answer to big space units your opponent might play that we might want to get rid of, like a Bright Hope or just a big Sentinel. We just want to get rid of it. And we can find this out of Triple Dark Raid, so that's pretty good. Then we got Swoop Down. So obviously Swoop Down is a card that I think is exceptional whenever you play a full space deck. It has two main purposes in the deck. The first one is give a saboteur to a unit and attack with it right away to bypass enemy space sentinel. Especially very good when you have one big um, locking TIE Phantom or one big 7-foot defender that we gave tons of experience to with the Outland TIE Fighters, with Tarkin or with TIE Advance, and then make a massive swing on the opponent, just win the game from that. The other way to use that card is obviously as a way to shoot down enemy ground units whenever you're in racing situation or whenever there's a big ground unit that's a very big problem. We have this as a pseudo shoot first in order to get rid of those specific units. So very good in the deck. Not good against everything, but it's mostly a very good card. No Good to Me Dead is once again just for racing. Whenever you are racing the opponent and you play No Good to Me Dead, the game is going to be very short, but so by the time the unit is going to untap, is going to ready, the game will already be over. It's cheap and it's exactly the kind of card we want in this kind of deck. Surprise Strike is the old star of the deck. It is, in my like, I've rated this card very highly, and a lot of people are saying like, yeah, why do you rate Surprise Strike so highly? Well, it's just the ultimate finisher, like for an aggro deck. It is the perfect card for a deck like this whenever we have those space unit that cannot be interacted with and we need those extra hoof and power to really put pressure on your opponent. And obviously Barrage, not only a way to boost our units, but obviously we're going to have very early on units that are very large. Therefore, we can pull out very powerful overwhelming barrage very early on in the game and completely wipe the opponent board. Whenever you play against other aggressive decks, this card is obviously an absolute bonkers. It's amazing in the deck, like it is in every deck it's in. In my opinion, overwhelming barrage is still the best card in the game, and it is very strong in this deck because of our ability to boost those units so hard, so quick. So that's pretty much it for the late game. As you can see, the game plan is, I hope the game plan makes a lot more sense now. And now let's talk about the sideboard a little bit. So obviously right now the meta is not established at all, so I cannot give you a sideboard plan the same way as I was doing in my previous videos, because the meta is still very much up in the air. The game is not, Shadow of the Galaxy has still not been released yet. So the sideboard is kind of like anyone's game. It's probably the thing that's going to move the most in the foreseeable future. But I just wanted to give you a couple of interesting thoughts I had about sideboarding, and this is kind of what I landed on. So I'm starting with 3 Bazine. I think Bazine is an absolute auto-include in every black-yellow deck, either in the main deck or in the sideboard. In this case, I decided to make it in the sideboard simply because Bazine is not an Imperial unit, and that's, I think, a big weakness for this deck. You want everything to be Imperial in the main deck. Absolutely everything is Imperial excepted the late game cards like Walker, a Battle Tank, and Architects, because big units don't need +1/+1 counter. But really the fact that Bazine is not Imperial is kind of a big deal. But I think the card is going to be so strong after sideboard to get rid of the specific cards that opponents are going to bring in order to counter our strategy. Also very good against control. The fact that it can be smuggled is extremely relevant, which means that you can basically not play her on turn 1 because you want to play something that is a bit more aggressive, but keep this card as a way, but still be able to smuggle it later on in the game to get rid of specific answers that might be a problem for the deck. Waylay is going to be mostly a way to deal in a mirror match, obviously to deal with those giant locking TIE Phantoms, 7-foot defender, anything that has like a lot of large sentinel units. Waylay is going to be an answer for this. So yeah, Waylay would add up to swoop down as answers to giant anti-space sentinels. Cunning is mostly an answer against aggro, because obviously against aggro it's pretty much just a race, and one of the best racing card in the game is Cunning. You play Cunning even at 6, tap down your 2 opponent units and give +4 attack to your own. Is going to give you a massive racing advantage and win you a lot of games. Another card to get rid of giant sentinels, but more likely going to be like for racing as well, but mostly racing against someone who has very large units as opposed to multiple smaller ones. Change of Heart is going to be a weapon of choice. And that's it for the deck. So let's talk about, I mean, as I said, I cannot really talk about matchups, but I can just talk about, generally speaking, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the deck. So the strength obviously is attacking the game from a different angle and taking the opponent by surprise. by completely swarming the space arena and putting tons of pressure on the opponent without him being able to interact more. So it's not as aggressive as a Sabine deck, but it is a lot more difficult to interact with because of the space nature of the deck and because of those units like 7th Defender and Lurking TIE Phantoms, which are difficult. It's also relatively consistent because we have quite a few of the card that duplicates of the card that we want to see at a specific moment. Triple Dark Raid also allows us to dig for those specific cards as well. So it's a deck that is relatively consistent, even though it is a deck where you really need to find the right card at the right moment. So sometimes it's a deck that can lose to itself. The main weakness of the deck is obviously any sort of waylay effects, that kind of thing. Obviously, Traitorous is extremely powerful against it, as Traitorous has always been amazing against Graham of Tarkin deck, generally speaking. I'm hoping that Traitorous is not going to see as much play, and maybe it's going to be worth it if Traitorous starts to see significant amount of play. Maybe it would be worth it to add in the sideboard some copies of Confiscate in order to deal with that. But once again, Bazine is also here to kind of like happen to kind of like block those kind of cards, and actually even the smuggled version of Bazine can still come into play before Traders happen. So we got a couple of answers to that, but obviously if you start seeing more people playing this, Confiscate is going to be a good way to deal with it. So notably, you would think that the deck has bad matchup versus Boba Fett, and from our testing, it hasn't really been the case. I mean, it hasn't. I think this deck has Boba, yes, has strong answers, but I think if you play it smart and you don't put all of your eggs in the same basket, the deck has a relatively decent chance against Boba. And one of the reasons is because Boba has always been kind of weak to space strategies. One of the main way in Spark of Rebellion to beat a Boba deck using Sabine was to go in space. So therefore, if you kind of don't put all of your eggs in the same basket and don't get blown out by a Waylay or a No Good to Me Dead or Relentless Pursuit, you are going to be in a decent spot. And so I think this deck it's a deck that is, as I said, mostly losing to itself more than it losing to specific strategy, even though some specific cards can really blow your heart very hard. So once again, it is too early to tell you precisely against what does he have a good matchup, against what does he have a bad matchup, because it's very early. Another thing is like this deck has a really good matchup against Control. Something that we found out was that Control had a lot of trouble dealing with all those Lurking TIE Phantoms, with all those threats coming from different places. It was very difficult for Control to deal with. It's kind of what we found out in our playtest. So we'll see how things evolve. I might do an updated videos when I will give you a more specific sideboard plan with more details on the different matchups. But for this, I need a meta to develop, and right now we still don't have a meta. So this is all I can give you for now. And before we finish this video, I would like to do a couple of mulligans to kind of show you how you want to mulligan in this deck. We'll start with this first hand here. So this hand is pretty good, as we got Lurking TIE Phantoms into TIE Advance. The problem is we don't have any turn 1 play, and we are playing an aggressive deck, so we need a turn 1 play. We're going to mulligan this. Okay, this hand is not amazing, but it's a much better. We can go Admiral Piet turn 1, turn 2 TIE Phantoms, and then we can go turn 3 Triple Dark Raid. That will either find an ATST, or it will find a TIE Advance, which is amazing. TIE Advance into Lurking TIE Phantoms. We have the option to either Lurking TIE Phantoms or 7th Defender, depending on what kind of opponent we have. There's certain opponents that will struggle more against the TIE Phantom, some that will struggle more against a 7th Defender. In this case, you want to resource the TIE Advance and the ATST. This new hand here is not as bad as it looks, because we got turn 1 ATST that we can give an experience to. On turn 2 we can go Outland TIE Vanguard, and then have enough resources for using Tarkin. This means that this ASB agent would be, so it would be 2-4 on turn 1, 2-4, it would be 3-5. So this guy is going to be 4-6 on turn 2. So we basically have a 4-6 on turn 2 plus a 2-1. You can also decide to use Tarkin's ability on the TIE Vanguard instead of the ISB agent if you don't want to put all of your eggs in the same basket. and then the turn after we have a Dark Rage. So I would actually resource the Reinforcement Walker and the Architects, and this is definitely a hand I would keep. Okay, so on this hand is also pretty solid. Depending on what kind of deck you're playing against, you might want to open up with TIE Fighter or Incinerator. It really depends on the matchup. Turn 2, Lurking TIE Phantoms. Turn 3, TIE Phantoms, and then so TIE Advance into TIE Phantoms or TIE Advance into Incinerator Trooper. Maybe you want to resource the Trooper here because we don't have that many buffs for the Trooper. It really depends on the matchup, really. So here you either want to resource Walker and Incinerator, or Walker and Piet, depending on the situation, depending on and if you want to open up with Incinerator, you can even resource Walker and TIE Phantom. Something to understand about late game units in this deck is that big cards like Walker, Architects, you want to resource those very aggressively because your deck has no ramp whatsoever. So really the way you're supposed to play those cards is in combination with triple Dark Raid. Unless you're in a very late game situation and then you can just cast them normally, but I would say that those cards are not meant to be played by hand most of the time. So I would definitely resource those cards very aggressively, generally speaking. Okay, so this hand is pretty decent. We don't have any buffs for Trooper, but that's okay. We got a turn 1 play that is a threat. We can resource the ATST and the Trooper, and then do a turn 2 7th Fit Defender or TIE Phantom, depending on the deck we're playing against. And then later on, we'll play tons of way to buff the Incinerator. Even if you don't have a way to buff Incinerators out of your hand, you can always do this with your Tarkin, and you're very likely to draw some sort of card that will boost the Incinerator later on. Okay, one last hand just for the fun. Okay, it's not working. Okay, so for some reason, I'm just going to try to refresh and see if it works. Okay, looks like the website is down. Anyway, so just to wrap up this video, I think Tarkin Vehicle, will this deck be part of the meta, is going to come down a lot to the meta itself, because I think the deck proactively is a very powerful deck, but as I said, it has a couple of very hard counters. And it's a deck that sometimes has consistency issue. Like, yes, it has a lot of duplicates of the same card, but sometimes it kind of loses to itself if it doesn't find the right pieces. So I think it's a deck that is very strong. One of the great quality of the deck that I didn't mention at all is that it's extremely budget. There's not a single legendaries out of the main deck. In the main deck there's not a single legendaries, as there's no expensive rares. I don't think swoop downs, no triple dark raid. I don't think those are going to be particularly expensive rares. And the rest is pretty much just commons and uncommons. In the sideboard is a lot more expensive because I think Bazine, I expect Bazine to be the most expensive rare in the set. Cunning is also quite expensive if you don't already have them, and Change of Heart is also a legendary. But the sideboard, as I said, is very much still up in the air. And there's different ways to build a sideboard, and I don't think those are absolutely must include. I think you can do very well with just other cards in the sideboard. I don't think those are like mandatory sideboard cards to have for the deck to function. I think the deck can definitely function without those. So it is probably one of the most budget decks you could ever build for Shadow of the Galaxy. It feels also very good to have a deck that at the same time is very competitive and also quite accessible that almost anybody can build. And I think that's really something that's going to be very positive for people moving forward as they dip their toe into Shadow of the Galaxy. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and if you got any questions about it, I will try to answer them myself. I might need my friend Beton, also known as Voltor, to answer some of those questions. Because he is the expert of the deck at the end of the day. I try to give as much insight as possible, but I think there's definitely a few questions that he might be able to answer. Anyway, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.